Thank you, Michael, for that very kind introduction, and it always brings a deficit to my bank account when I have to pay for those, but they're awesome. So I'm really glad that you're here today, and Kevin and I talked beforehand. We don't want to spend a long time in the formalities of the bios. What we want to say to you is that we think we're going to have a conversation that we hope will encourage your heart. So before I bring Kevin up here, most of you know that he was, you've read his bio, he was raised by a single mom. He was raised in virtual poverty, and over the period of his life, God has just done some amazing things. You're going to hear part of that story today. You probably know about his athletic involvement with the Sac Republic FC. You also know about the Kings, as Michael alluded to. What you may not know is that he has a number of entrepreneurship and innovation category effects. I really appreciate the fact that he's constantly sewing into how do we innovate and make business better. He has some real estate ventures that have seen improvement, I think, since his ownership. I recall a couple places where he's been involved and have watched the upgrade. And when I think of Kevin Nagle, I think of the word upgrade. I think of him bringing an upgrade to the atmospheres that he's in. I think of him bringing an upgrade to the people that he's around. He's given millions of dollars in our region, and I want to talk a little bit about that today. Like, why would you do that? Why give? What motivates your giving? So we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But before he comes up, the last thing I want to do is say this. I did not have to twist his arm whatsoever to be able to speak here at this event. I did, however, have to twist his arm on one thing, which was I knew that our pictures were going to feature suits and ties. And I said, Kevin, is there any way that we could go to this event and not have a suit and tie on? And he said, I will if you will. So would you welcome Kevin Nagle in jeans and sports coat. Let's see, maybe are we okay?
Thank you.
1, 2, 3. There we go. All right, Kevin, here we go. We're going to have a conversation. And one of the things I want to do is just sort of ask the questions that I think that people would want to ask if we had a time in a coffee shop. So you've had these amazing successes, a string of business activities, things that have taken place that have been awesome. Has there been anything in your career that surprised you? Any of your successes that have surprised you?
You know, it's really funny, John. It's a great question, but I think before I always answer, what things in my business have surprised me, I always say the thing, what has really surprised me the most in my life? And the thing that really surprised me the most in my life are my children. Watching my 2 children being born and raising them. If somebody asks me, what's the most successful thing you've done in your lifetime? I always say it's raising my 2 children. And I mean, there's nothing else like watching your child coming into this world as this innocent human being, that the good Lord allowed that to happen. So before I start about the business part, I always tell people, that's the essence of it. Because everything else, if you don't have that, doesn't matter. Now on the business part, what was the question you had?
I'm surprised.
See, I got too emotional just on that one side. And watch out. You'll see the evangelical side of me come over time, so that plan on another 3.5 hours, you'll be ready.
All right, so let me give you maybe a specific tangent. But by the way, John Maxwell says everything rises and falls on leadership, and I think everything in leadership rises and falls on relationship. And the fact that you chose to focus on relationship first, that just touches my heart, and I think that's a good word for us. But very quickly, strengths. Everybody talks about strengths and weaknesses, and what strength have you had that you've seen used over and over again in business? How have your strengths helped to maximize your business success?
It's not conventional, but it's not something that's surprising, and that is what you learn by failure. And really what it is what you learn by failure so that you can succeed. And I'm guessing you're sitting amongst a lot of people in this room that have enormous amount of success. But I'm also guessing that if you probably think about what you learn from failure. And from my perspective, I really sort of lived a life where a lot of people told me and to my family things that we could not do, and I heard that a lot. And the reality of it is that I remember in first grade, it's sort of funny that I guess that my first grade teacher didn't think that I understood English at that point, and was telling my mother that I was a child that needed some additional assistance, and she didn't know if I was really qualified to go to second grade. So that was the first thing that really touched me, and I said, I'm going to show her someday. I'm going to show her someday. And so the simple side of it is learning from your failures, and I would say that wasn't a failure at that time. I just really said, I'm going to show that teacher someday. But I would just say also just the second thing as well is along the same lines, which is really a business aspect. A number of years later, really, I was sort of tracking up the corporate world, and I know a number of people in this world, in this room, work for large corporations, and so I felt like I was sort of this high-flying business development guy, Fortune 500 company, and the CEO of the company said, you know what, Kevin, I just want you to know right now, you are never going to be the president of this company. And so, I mean, that was a little bit demoralizing. 13 years with the company, somebody already telling you that. But let me just finish my one point, because I know John has got a whole list of things. We may only end up with 3 questions if we talk. Because I can't wait to hear what I say next, by the way.
Neither can we. Go ahead.
So, just the point of it is that same person who said that. And part of it is because this company that I was working for was starting to suffer, and I said, we need to make some changes. And he said, Kevin, he said, I just want to let you're welcome to come to the board meeting next. But if you ever bring up making an acquisition or buying a product, I'm going to fire you. So I knew at that particular point that I'd learned that I was going to have to create my own opportunities, that I was going to have to take control of my own situation. Look, again, I'm not here to demonize Fortune 500 companies, because again, maybe many of you have or work for them. But the reality of it is that there are many times in my career that I saw during the time that I did work for them, where we were telling people how wonderful the organization was. People would walk out of the room, and we knew that we were going to let people off that next day. So I felt I really had to learn I was going to take control of my own situation.
So Kevin, I actually want to track on that. We do have a list of questions that we may never get to, by the way. In my reading about leadership, one of the things that I think gets lifted up is this whole idea of perseverance. And when I think about Envision Pharmaceuticals and launching something on your own and then persevering through what no doubt were, some treacherous waters. And then I think about the Sac Republic FC. Somebody who looks at your resume might say it was always up and to the right. But I suspect that that's not true, that you've had to persevere, you've had to endure. Can you talk a little bit about that? Perseverance.
Good questions on perseverance. I mean, it kind of goes back to what you learn by some of the things that you fail at. You just make sure that you don't permanently repeat it over and over again. But I would say persevere. I mean, that's the one thing. And in the case of Envision, which ultimately was a company that did sell for $2.3 billion, and I think there were 3 owners of us that we founded it. But what we also did is we engaged a lot of our employees and made sure that they became owners as well. I really believe that if you're going to persevere, you have to persevere with the cause, right? I mean, that's really the plan, John, is we need a strategic plan. And the reality of it is you engage other people and say, how are we going to succeed? And I've got lots of funny stories about Envision. I'm not going to talk about them today. But I would say this much. That Envision was a company that no one thought was going to survive. And by 3rd year, my 2 partners and I, we put about $5 or $6 million into it. And then just what we were talking about before, we recalibrated our business model. We became a business interrupter, and the reality of the rest of it is history. But I mean, you absolutely have to persevere, and sometimes you have to make adjustments more than once, sometimes twice, but it is inevitable that you will do it. Just like when you write a strategic plan, it's probably obsolete. On the part of, I'll just tell you a little bit of Sac Republic, because John, you touched on something that's very sensitive to me. Sac Republic, as you know, is, I believe, on the verge of becoming an MLS approved team.
Just a second, everybody in favor of that?
Thank you. Would you guys then stand in line? I've got my ticket guy over there. Just a couple things about perseverance in the Sac Republic, to your point. There were a couple of founders before that did an absolutely miraculous thing with being able to create that idea and make it a reality. I did not do that. I would never take credit for it. But what a lot of people don't know, and this is something we'll just share in the room, we had a lot of tensions that were running between that person and me. I'm not going to name to be a great person. But we ended up in litigation. We almost didn't make it. We almost didn't make the cutoff to be able to be given consideration. But I give him the courage and guts once we got into litigation that 4 days before the organization was ready to go into default, that he called me up on a Sunday night and said, I need to talk to you. Now, he was under his lawyer's orders, and I was under mine. And so what we did is by the way, any lawyers in the room?
With apologies, you're about ready to get offended, so just prepare yourself.
I think he has the courage just to raise his hand.
We bless you for that.
But what we did do is, on a Sunday night, we cut the deal, and by Thursday we made sure that everybody got paid and got funded. And that took a lot of courage. There's a story that will come out on this. It's not to demonize him or anyone else, because we're here, we understand the word forgiveness.
Right.
And the reality of it is that there's a story, and frankly, I would say this much. Up until that time, I was taking a lot of hit and a lot of heat in social media, and a lot of people didn't know what I shared with you. But I'll probably write a story about it someday, because there's an incredible story that goes along with it, John, that is important.
So I love that about you, Kevin. And we have had a relationship over a number of years. We're not super deep in that, but as I've observed you to be a man of principle. I had the privilege to be with you a couple of times in your office, and each time I came to your office, I sensed the character of your being. So spiritual life, values like faith and forgiveness are important to you. Can you talk a little bit about how faith has been with you throughout the journey, and would you particularly pay attention to, is faith something that's different or outside of business, or is it part of your everyday life in business?
A great question. I mean, I would say this much. I'm a little bit maybe less conventional than folks in this room, although we all carry the same banner, and that is that we're Christians. I believe we're Christians, and I'm a Christian. I happen to be Catholic. I was raised a Catholic, sort of left the church for a while, and tried to bring my daughters, who I was raising, to introduce them into religion. And for some reason, they found their way back, and they both ended up going to faith-based institutions. Put that aside. The part about faith, I think when you were raised into it, it never really leaves you. Maybe you're not thinking about it at that particular time, but I've told many people throughout the day that sometimes I'll just pray. It's just a reality. You've heard that old story about sometimes when you're the CEO, it's lonely at the top. When Envision got to be a very large company, I mean, it was a $5 billion company when I handed it off. There were times when I had to make tough decisions by myself, and there's not a whole lot of people sometimes that you can reach out to and talk to, whether you have a significant other, a wife, a husband, whatever the case may be. And so I always find the safety, the safety valve is always, it's easy for me to pray. That's going to help me. And it may be throughout the day, and sometimes it might be at night, just because of the way time permits. But I think that, John, from my standpoint, for me, I think it's just full integration. Now, some people would say, others have proctor religion. Now, do you guys know what proctor religion is? That's a person, do you know what that is, John?
I don't think I do. Tell me.
It's the first thing I've known that John said, no, he doesn't know. So here's what proctor religion is really fast. I heard Lou Holtz say it one time. Lou Holtz also was a pretty devout Christian man. And he said, you know when I pray most? And I said, when? I asked him this question. I was sitting with him at a table one time. He said, when Ohio State was on the 2-yard line with 2 minutes to play, and he goes, we were ahead by 5 points. I said, Lord, if you promise not to let them score, I promise I'll go to church on Sunday. Meanwhile, I had my fingers crossed, thinking like, just in case, it's not going to make me look like I'm a liar if I don't go. But he talked about that, and it's sort of funny. And we know that there are a lot of people that maybe do that. But in the end, I think the most important thing is that people have faith in their life, however they do it. Whether it's during the day, like the way I described, from time to time, or whether it's they choose certain times just to spend and engage with the Bible, or talk to Jesus Christ in their own way.
Thank you. You know, Kevin, one of the things that I've appreciated, and I think many of the people in the room have appreciated about you, is your deep love and affection for the region. You of course, have interests that span outside the geography of this region, but you've been deeply committed. You've literally given away millions to organizations. You have a particular concern, I think, for education, for health, for empowerment, and I mentioned entrepreneurship, and I love that heartbeat. Kevin, when you think about the region, why do you give money away? Why do you give to help causes? Why are you engaged in causes where you lend your name, not just finances, but you lend your name and time? Why is that important to you?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, John. But there is a dumb thing that I've done where I've given money away. And so far, I've given $40 million away to the Sac Republic, but we haven't gotten MLS approval. That was not one of the more Phi Beta Kappa moves, because there's been nobody so far. I can't figure it out in any facet, by the way, of business, where they've taken a risk, that kind of risk. And I think it leads to that particular word that I'm talking about. If our region is going to get better, we have to take risk. You are all successful business people in this room. You've taken risk at a certain time. I was fortunate enough, because of the fact that I came across a sum of money through some successes, that not just to me, but so many other people that helped me become successful. Because I never say it's me, that just doesn't work. Let's start saying we, then it starts working. Yeah. But the reality of it is that I think that it's really an unselfish part. I believe this. You heard a little bit about how I grew up. And I always remembered that I said, if I get a chance to help somebody, I can. I was talking to my driver, Bobby. He's standing in the back. And we were talking about this on the way over, and we saw a homeless person. One of the things that I've noticed that my driver does from time to time when I'm doing certain things is he's over talking to homeless people and helping them, and giving them money, and giving them encouragement, and trying to get them up from wherever they are. And I think that my opinion, by the way, I asked him, I said, where did you learn that? He goes, I learned that from you. Just a laugh. And he said that. He actually did say that. And I got touched by it. But it's really part, I think, John, frankly, in my DNA. I mean, because of, I was impacted growing up. And I really felt like the good Lord, I mean this, I felt like the good Lord, when I first made what I would say my real $1 million, because I sold more than one company, that I was sitting, two things. I was sitting back in my seat at home, and I had a Merrill Lynch account. And they said, we're about ready to wire this money into your account. And as I sat in there, and I was 42 years old at the time, I'm only 43, bye. I was looking at the numbers on the screen. And Jim, I asked myself, do I feel any different? And I didn't feel any different. I knew that I was now going to start to achieve some financial security. But I also knew that I said there were going to be so many other opportunities that I was going to be able to do. So helping the region, there are just a lot of things that you can do with that. And I think that, look, we live in California. This is the toughest market that you can. We have a siege right now coming on with us between, separation of church and state. They want to eliminate so many of it. As you may know, some of you may know, I'm the chair of the board of trustees at St. Mary's College. I talk to John from time to time and other presidents about the fight to make sure that we protect that. And I think that I believe that's something that I was driven to do, and I'm happily willing to do it.
I think that my own personal belief, I'm not going to preach or teach, but I don't think that there are accidents. And I think that it's not an accident that God placed you where you are, and He's, in the midst of mistakes and challenges, He's also given you great success.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Why did He allow for me to get a D in a wood shop?
It's so you wouldn't cut some of your fingers off by spending more time in wood shop. He's trying to discourage you from working with saws.
So let me just tell you really fast about the story about a D in wood shop, and that is true, by the way. So I had to go to Catholic school. My sisters went to Catholic school. And I was the one that was sort of the persuasive one of the three of us. And so I said, Mom, please, let us go to public school. So my mother said, okay, Kevin, you and your two sisters can go to public school. But if you get anything like a C or lower, you're going back to St. Matthew's or St. Anthony's, and this is Long Beach. So I said, okay. So what happened was, when we transferred from Catholic school to public school, it was really easy. The only class that wasn't easy for me was woodshop. It was the last class of the day, and we had these guys, with those, this is my era, do you remember those wimps? These guys that had wimps, and they were like the guys that seemed to know just manual arts a lot better than the rest of us. And so here I was, a kid in the back of the room, not raised by a father who taught you some of those things. And so I never could complete any project, but I was really quiet in the class. So as I went through the day, and we had our report card, I got A, because it was great. Fortunately, those are the three things that you learn in Catholic school. So when I went home, my mother called my first sister, she was the oldest one, and then my second sister, Kathy, and I was holding my report card, and down at the bottom it said wood shop, and had A, B, C, D, and the teacher had circled D, but I had an E where it said tried hard. So when it came time for my mother to say, Kevin, I want to see your report card, what I did is I took my finger and I put it over all the other grades, and it said E, tried hard. And I figured she would have said, well, that's great, Kevin. But instead, she pulled it out of her hand and she looked at it, she was a D in woodshop. She said, you are going back to St. Anthony's and you're going to take this class over. And I can only think of one thing, John. I said, sorry, Mom. They don't treat woodshop. They don't have woodshop at St. Anthony's. So with that, I saved myself.
Well, I don't know why all that happened, but I know this. I believe that he is in a significant location. If you would just humor me, I'd love to pray for just a moment that God would give Kevin wisdom and guidance in his business assignments and for the region, because I think he represents us. I think God has placed him in many positions, both with the Sac Republic and other. I'd love for you to just join me. If you're comfortable with this, reach out your hands towards him, and I'm going to pray over him right now. Heavenly Father, I thank you for Kevin Nagle. Thank you for his life. And Lord, he'd be the very first one to say that he's not perfect. He's got all kinds of stuff and issues just like me. But God, you have chosen to put him in this position of responsibility, this position of leadership, this position of influence. I pray, God, that your grace, your kindness, your goodness, your love would surround him, that he'd have wisdom and discernment. And whether it's with one of the athletic teams, or whether it's one of the investment firms, or whether it's one of the charitable activities, God, in each and everything that he puts his hand to, I pray that he would prosper. I pray that he would have grace and wisdom. And Lord, I thank you that you've placed him in a position to bring influence into this region for your glory. And I pray that this region would blossom and spring forth, and that we would see, as we've already heard, we would see the beginning days of revival and dynamic excitement as we see your hand at work in our midst. We love you, God, and thank you for your presence in this room today. Amen. Would you thank Kevin for sharing his story?